Hello and welcome to your True North, a space filled with authentic talks about personal stories, a space where we explore and let ourselves be in awe of the human spirit. I am IULIA and I will be your guide along this journey of discovering conventional, motivational, surprising, witty, or even persuasive personal stories. Do you happen to walk by people in the street and wonder what their story is? Wouldn't it be interesting to have some inside information into what makes them tick? Something like subtitles to a great foreign movie. I'll tell you what, please join me in a quick visualization exercise. Close your eyes and imagine walking down the street. You see a figure approaching, and suddenly, out of nowhere, you hear these words. I am Stefano. I make people think, feel, and take action. I own my own company, Pack Creations, where I work with businesses to define their brands. I create magic with words. Creativity underlines my focus in and out of the working world. I bet you would want to hear more. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Stefano Capacchione. Welcome, Stefano.
Thank you very much for the welcome. It feels slightly strange hearing somebody else take on my persona, but it was a wonderful intro. So thank you very much for the welcome.
Thank you for joining me. So you are all about brand stories, but what is your personal story? I am curious to know what is the reason you get up in the morning?
The reason I get up in the morning. I think for the flow of creativity, actually. So, as you read in the intro, for me, the most exhilarating part of any day is coming up with an idea, being inspired by somebody else's idea, and then being able to translate it into something that I understand and can direct into my own sphere, I guess. So yeah, I get up for the love of creating, and then I'm lucky that I'm able to do that both from a personal perspective and from a working perspective, because as lots of business people will tell you, not everything that you do in business is about your number one kind of love. I don't spend all day every day writing, but at the same time it's a big part of what I do, so that gives me the motivation to get up and to go.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, getting up, creativity being the one reason that you get up in the morning, I think this is one of my reasons also. So yeah, I completely agree with you. But you see, in business, we use stories to incite an emotional response, to build curiosity and urgency, sometimes even lack. But how can we make our own stories compelling narrative? Because after all, people need to connect to people. When you sell a product, a service, an idea, you sell to another person. So, in your view, how can we make our own stories be more compelling?
That's true. What you said then is true in terms of the idea that we work quite a lot with clients, and we ask them the questions about who are you speaking to, who are you trying to sell to, who do you want to interact with on a daily basis, how do you want them to react when you're talking to them, etc. Quite often the ideas that come back are, well, we're talking with this size business, we're talking with this type of business in this sector. We're talking, and it's all about who the business is. What we often like to then work out is, but if you're talking to these kinds of business, who is it within that business that you're talking to? What is it that they enjoy? What kind of challenges do they have on a daily basis? How do they like their coffee in the morning? What mode of transport do they use to get to work? What do they do on the weekends? Because all of these kinds of questions are the types of things that your customer is actually going to care about a lot more, quite often, than whether or not you've got the fastest printer in the history of printers. Most people aren't going to really care about that, unless you can maybe tell them that the fastest printer in the history of printers is going to be an exceptional tool for you, because you can print out those documents, take them to the post office on the way to get your coffee in the morning, so you can get there quicker to have that chat with IULIA, who is your who you see every single day in the cafe, and you get an extra 5 minutes with her because your printing was done quicker. Whatever it is, like the story that you're telling, the idea behind those stories is to make people feel something. Because when people feel something, they're much more likely to connect, and you're much more, it's much more possible to be able to, I don't like to say the word create desire. I don't think you create desire, but you're able to stimulate it. Now, you asked specifically about your personal story and how your personal story also connects. And for me, the best way to connect with people via your personal story is just to tell your story, because your story is what makes you unique. Your story is never going to be the same as somebody else's. You've never been, nobody else has spent their whole life in exactly the same places as you have, doing exactly the same things as you have, with exactly the same people as you have, at exactly the same time as you have. It's just impossible. So your story is already yours, and it's different. And you might get bored of it in your own mind pretty quickly, because, you know, well, I guess some people do, but most people don't think of themselves as, I am the best company in the world. They probably are more interested in other people than they are in themselves, or at least the idea that other people would be interested in them. But lots of people are interested in your story, because although your story is unique to you, the feelings that you have, the ideas that you have, the challenges that you have are things that other people experience. And so therefore it becomes relatable to them.
Yes, and of course you cannot reach everyone, and you will not be able to communicate the same with everyone. But yes, when you are an entrepreneur, or when you lead a company, you practically are the face of that company, the face of that service that you try to put out there, of the product that you're trying to sell. So what would you say your personal values are that you instilled into your business brand?
It's interesting. Quite often we don't tell people our personal values, or our brand values as Puck Creations. We have them, and we work a lot on making sure that we've defined them, and that because the company isn't just me, it's also my partner Cyan, and we also bring in people to work with us on a freelance contracting basis, and we make sure that they understand what our values are too. But what we try and do is we try to show what our values are through our everyday actions, and we try to show the things that matter to us, and we do that by being consistent. We do that by being clear in the messaging that we offer people. Now, One value which we've already spoken about today, and I hope is quite obvious through everything that we do as a business, is the idea of creativity. And so for us, the reason I want to mention that specific one, for us, when we talk to our clients about their values and understanding their values and making sure that they've defined them correctly, what we often talk about is the idea that the value isn't just there for your customer or for your client. It's there for everybody that you speak to. It's there for your suppliers, your business partners. It's there for the friends of your client, for the people you talk to on a daily basis, your colleagues, your new staff members coming in. And so when I talk about creativity as a core value of Puck Creations, we try and make sure that everything we do is creative, even when we're talking to suppliers, even when we're setting up podcasts. We try and make sure there's some touch, at least, of creativity going in to that work, because it underlines what Puck Creations is all about.
About creativity, when did you first see yourself as a creative person?
That's an interesting question. That's also a difficult question. When did I actually see myself as being creative? I think for a long time, I probably didn't. I think, like a lot of people, I always found it difficult to associate the word with some of the actions that I had. So, for example, I've been playing the guitar badly since I was about 14, and singing even worse alongside it. And I had started writing songs almost from the moment I started playing the guitar. And as you can imagine, they were pretty awful, especially as I could only play 3 chords. But at the same time, there was something creative about it. But I wouldn't have called myself a creative or a creative person in any way, shape, or form. After that, I moved into the world of sales and marketing, and I had to be creative with the way that I spoke to people and got them to understand the product and the benefits of a product and how it works, and told stories to people. But I wouldn't have called myself a creative. I went traveling. I've actually done a lot of traveling, about 3 years worth of traveling altogether. And whilst I was traveling, I often had to find creative ways to even find a bed for the night, or to interact with people and get them to maybe be on my side a little bit when I needed support in tricky situations. But again, I wouldn't have called myself a creative. I think the first time I really thought of myself as a creative was when I realized that it was something that you could do and be paid for. And that didn't come until I was working for a large radio company in the UK, and started writing some radio ads for them, and suddenly realized that, oh, this is, people will think that I'm creative enough that they would actually pay for the work. And at that point went, oh, maybe I am a creative. Okay. But it's a silly mentality to have, really, because we're all creatives in our own way. Everybody has some kind of creativity in them, but lots of people hide it away or don't recognize it because, I don't know, a billion reasons. Maybe fear is one of them. Maybe just literally lack of understanding of their own creativity. I don't want to project my own thoughts onto other people, but there's there's lots of reasons that people I think don't realize how creative they are.
It's probably like a skill that you need to work at in order to shape and define and see how exactly it fits with your personality, with who you are. I mean, it's always been fascinating to me, the stories that people tell themselves about other people's stories. The way, you know, sometimes you brand someone just by hearing some details about their life, or their personal life, or their business life. I mean, I was a numbers cruncher for a couple of years, and people wouldn't probably have pegged me as a creative being at that point, but still it was in me, and it came out in various shapes and forms throughout my life. But yes, it's interesting if you can, you know, pinpoint exactly the moment when you said, okay, yes, I can do this, I am this, I want to be defined this way as a creative person. Did
Sorry
you?
to interrupt slightly there, but interestingly, the idea of being defined as a person by one particular label of you, I always find a little bit interesting too. It's as much as I think of myself as somebody who is creative now and who does creative things, I still wouldn't want to be defined as the creative, if that makes sense. The reason being, because all of the other sides of my life are also a big part of what make me who I am. I loved maths as a child. I still love maths. And like you said, so you crunch numbers. And so I've always had a lot of fun with mental arithmetic. I like logic. I like puzzles. And the creative side of me is always there, and through puck creations, creativity is vital. The business wouldn't work without it. But at the same time, and when we talk about defining brands and business brands and people's brands, it is what you want other people to see. And interesting, it is about labeling, but sometimes on a personal level, there's something about labeling people that slightly disturbs the mind, I guess, because it's you base a whole person sometimes on one particular set of criteria. You must be this type of person or that type of person. You must be X or you must be Y. And most often, everybody is somewhere in between.
That's true. Well, I like to look at this through the lens of stories. I believe that the stories that you tell about yourself change along your the journey called life. And this doesn't mean that you lose something from those prior stories. I mean, today, yes, you may call yourself as a creative. Yesterday, you might have called yourself a numbers cruncher, to follow the example I gave earlier. I mean, I believe that there are seasons in our life, and we keep evolving, and we keep learning, and we keep getting in touch with ourselves. Of course, as I said, this doesn't mean that you lose something that you had in the prior stories that you told about yourself. Sometimes I think we need to also find new approaches to old personal stories. This is why I would like you to share a story about a moment that impacted you and transformed you.
Moments that impacted and transformed me. It's a difficult question because one specific moment is often hard to come by, I think, for a transformative. I think I'd probably say that as a person, I've developed a lot over time, and there's been lots of small moments that make up the transformation. However, I guess one of the biggest impacts on my life and one of the biggest changes to my life probably came when I was just 18. In fact, I'd been 18 for 2 days. And my mum had been diagnosed with cancer 3 months before my 18th birthday. That moment when she was diagnosed with cancer was a crash, I guess. She told us And I very unsympathetically and unempathetically had to escape the room, and went and got extremely drunk with a couple of friends, just because selfishly it was all about me, and how was I going to cope without my mum, rather than thinking about how is she coping with the last few, the idea that she's just been diagnosed and she doesn't know how long she's got, etc. And then, like I say, 2 days before my 18th birthday, sorry, 2 days after my 18th, on my 18th birthday, I was in the hospital as she was lying very close to passing away. And she managed to find the strength to write on a birthday card. And she wrote just a few words, I can't even remember the exact words, but it was just something along the lines of, "I love you, happy birthday." And then 2 days later, she was gone. And so that whole moment massively impacted me, because the next year was all about, because I'm an early birthday in terms of the school calendar year. So the next year was all about studying and my A-levels. And I didn't really want to do any of it. I didn't want to study. I didn't want to concentrate on any of that kind of world. And I guess it probably hit home to me that I also didn't want to follow the typical paths of life. I wanted to make sure that I was doing things my way and living my life to the full. And at that point was probably the moment I decided, I'd always wanted to travel, but I decided I was traveling. I was going to find a way to do it. I was going to find a way to see the world. I was going to find a way to embrace different cultures, to understand different ways of life. And so I guess that was a big moment, because although it then took time to develop that, I then went off to the working world for a while. I earned money. I found ways to make that money. The actual idea then of going traveling and doing things differently, and I guess not conforming to everybody else's ideas of what people should be, probably came initially from that moment. It's hard to say for definite, but it's something that I think rings true for sure.
Thank you for sharing this, for letting yourself be vulnerable enough to talk about this. When we tell stories, you create a positive communication and you create positive memories, even though some memories that you talk about can be painful, but it creates the connection between people. So what do you think makes a good story?
I think what makes a good story, what I love about stories is that they are all so different, that they all come from different places, from different ideas, from different, and this is key, moments in time. For me, people often say they can't tell a story, they haven't got any stories, they don't know how to tell a story. Everybody has stories. Everybody can tell a story. And they often come from very small moments in time. Things that might seem insignificant to a lot of people, but you notice something. Something happened and you remember that moment and it made you feel something. And you might not even remember the exact details. A little bit like I couldn't remember the exact details of what my mum wrote on that card, but it was a significant moment and everything else around it was a significant moment. And my mum passing away was clearly, the key moment for everybody. But for me, that writing on the card and her handing me the card, that was the moment that really, I guess, made me feel something really extra powerful and made me burst into tears at the time. But there's always these small moments, and people might think, well, of course you remember this. This was a huge moment in your life. Your mum passed away. But I also remember smaller things, like just random occasions where I might have tripped up over a curb, and then I've been pulled up and somebody helped me. So the reason I'm mentioning this, because you said what makes a powerful story, the idea of a powerful story is just that you connect with somebody else and that somebody else feels something that you felt. Somebody who may never have been through even a similar experience, but has had similar feelings to the feelings that you had when that experience happened. That's what generates a powerful story. So to me, all a powerful story is understanding a moment in time, describing what led up to that moment, and also describing some of the feelings around that moment, and then clarifying some kind of end result, what happened after that particular moment in time. If you can do that, the likelihood is you're going to connect, you're going to make somebody feel something. And that's what makes a powerful story.
Yeah, I totally agree with this. You know, they say storytelling regulates oxytocin. It calms the fight or flight response. So I know that you have a story ready for us. Would you be willing to share it?
I will, of course, I will. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to do so. So this story is something I wrote for an initiative that you were part of recently, but it was actually for 2020 called Storytelling with Puck. The title is Not a Single Tear. Not a single tear. A lifetime together. Every second possible in each other's arms, yet not a single tear. I watched her closely. Her eyes scanned the room wearily, although with a strangely sharp focus. She knew she was nearing the end. She knew it was time to say goodbye, but she was stronger than us all, it seemed. As she turned to Alberto, she shivered a little. She asked him to come closer and whispered something in his ear. His sobbing transformed into laughter before violently progressing into an hysterical wail. He glanced over at me, took a deep breath, and kissed his mother's hand. His sister Jackie couldn't bear it. She didn't have a good relationship with her mother, but that seemed to make it even harder. What mistakes has she made? Why did they never reconcile? Why couldn't she just forgive and forget? What caused them to fight in the first place? Finally, she looked back at me. She ushered me close and kissed me on the forehead. As she whispered, "I love you," I felt the salty water brush my cheek. Her cries got louder as she thanked me for being the father a child can only dream of, and a husband that was always the envy of every girl in town. With that came her final breath. It was time. Of course, I felt a sadness. I kissed her out of respect and nodded at the young duo next to me. They embraced. I didn't feel right joining in. They tell me that we had a lifetime together, that no love was stronger. They tell me that they love me too. A different kind of love, but a powerful love all the same. They tell me it's time to go home. I'm not sure I'll ever see these people again. They seem lovely, so I hope I do, but I am so confused. How could I love these people so strongly, but not know them? How could I say goodbye to the one that they tell me is my dearest, but not feel anything other than the empathy you feel for a car crash victim? How could I not shed a tear? Oh well, life goes on. I'm heading home now, wherever that is.
Wow, that's a powerful story because we talked about powerful stories moments before, and yes, it is. It keeps you hanging. I think this is one of the keys to creating a powerful story. When you can keep your reader, your listener hanging on to see what happens next, and you find yourself confused. You find yourself going through a whole range of emotions, of feelings. Yes, thank you for this. It was great.
My pleasure. It's interesting because often the tables are slightly turned, and I'm listening to other people's stories and giving a little bit of analysis on them. And people sometimes tell me that they find it weird to hear me and other people kind of chatting about their stories. I know how that feels now. But thank you very much.
Well, on this note, how do you face the blank page block? I for one am training my brain to work in time slots and to be productive and creative on demand. This is what I aim for. I don't always get it, but I try to be creative over short periods of time that I set for myself. How do you handle this process? So how do you face the great blank page?
Page, yeah. Actually, often I'm not overly worried about the blank page. The reason for that is because I'm very process orientated when it comes to making sure that all of the other work has its time and has its place. So things like the finances, things like client meetings, things, all of the day-to-day work that isn't so focused on creating something new. But when it comes to creativity and when it comes to ideas, if I'm working on something for either myself or for a client and nothing has come in at that period of time, I tell myself that's okay and I move on and I look at something else. I always give myself enough time as a supplier, as when people are asking me to do work, so that I am able, if I need to break away and then to leave something be for a while and come back to it later. So I will sit down next to a screen quite often and I will maybe start trying to think up of some ideas, trying to do some research, trying to gather my thoughts as to how I can create something for someone. If something comes, then brilliant. I will get it all down on paper as quickly as I can. I won't try and edit it. I would just have a whole mess of words which nobody will understand, and then I'll come back and revisit it later to neaten it up and make it make sense. But if nothing comes, as I say, I will either move on to a different piece of work if I'm still feeling creative, but just not about that particular subject. Or if I'm not feeling creative, I will stop. I will go and do something else. I will go for a walk. I will just stare out the window for a while and look at nature around me or people watch, depending on where I am at the time. I think some of the best ways for me to be creative is to not think about being creative. And then often the thoughts and the ideas come, and then I panic because I wonder where the notepad went, or I have to get my phone out and make a note on there or something instead, so that I don't lose the idea that I had. I panic less these days. I'm much more organized, but when I first started out, I had nothing next to me. But yeah, so that's kind of my creative process, is to allow creativity to happen. I find it very hard to push creativity out. I find I'm the least creative if I try to do that.
Yes, so you basically try to be gentle with the process and with yourself and with your thoughts in the moment. But what happens when you have a deadline and you are pressed to, come up with something, and you want it to be good, and you want it to transmit something to your target audience. How do you go about that?
So often, as I say, one of the things that I find key to the business relationships that we have and to making sure that things run smoothly is that I always leave enough space between the work that I'm doing and a time for a deadline, that I have time to create, I have time to go away, I have time to have a walk and to come up with ideas so that I can come back. However, you're right, that's not always the case. There are times I had recently to write a whole PR piece for somebody in the space of about an hour and a half. If I'm honest, when something like that happens, I just don't think. I know I've got an hour and a half. I think that sets me into panic mode, and then creativity kind of just hits me at that point quite often, and so I'm then able to write something. Also, when I'm writing for clients, it's always important to be creative. It's always important to do things slightly differently, but also there's a lot of other points that come to writing for clients. There's the idea of what exactly is the goal, who are they speaking to, what are they trying to achieve, why are you, or what's the tone of voice that you're writing in, why do they care about what you're writing. When it comes to writing for yourself, it's, I just want to write whatever comes into my head and put it down. But with clients, because the parameters are there, actually that often helps to both be creative, because you can come up with something within the parameters that you have, but also it helps to just get something down. As I said earlier, sometimes I get things down and then I edit it later. And then even in the editing process, it makes it creative. But when you have a whole load of information, because that's the information that needs to get to a client, you can get it down and it's not that creative at first, and it's just not that good. If I'm honest, it's not something I'd want to show anybody. But once it's there, you can play with it, you can edit it, you can tweak it, you can then make it more creative. You'll read it back, you'll read it aloud, and you'll think, actually, that I know what I'm trying to say, but that doesn't make sense. So you'll just, maybe I've done this quite often, I cut the second half of a paragraph and I put it to the first half just to see if it works. It doesn't make full sense at that time because the grammar's then wrong, but that doesn't matter because I can then tweak the grammar to make it to make it sit. So it's all about playing. It's all about I guess adjusting and allowing yourself to not be precious also about what you've put down the first time, because however much you might like some of the little phrases and things you put down, and you can keep them and put them in a drawer for later, they might not be right for your clients at the time. So you have to realize that you're writing for your client and your client's audience, not for yourself.
So what you're saying is it's okay to have the freedom to create, but sometimes, many times, it's okay to have some to be confined and to have a structure, so you know exactly what to put on the paper, let's say, instead of just, I mean, sometimes when you're completely free, no, no walls, no borders, no nothing, you might miss the target.
That's it, yeah. And with client work, that's often the case, is that, you need those boundaries. But even sometimes, not just with client work, even when you're just being creative in general, somebody who I've been speaking to a lot recently, Cyan's older university lecturer, a gentleman named Alistair Fee, a brilliant man, absolutely brilliant man, creative genius. I could listen to him speak all. But anyway, that's slightly off topic. He was asked to write a poem for a book that was published in Northern Ireland, where he lives, and with the poem, he had to write it around a particular object. So he had to get an item and write it around that item, and so suddenly the free flowing of creativity was restricted by the idea that it had to be about this very specific subject. But he said and I agree with this, it can do, it made him more creative, because sometimes you have to be creative enough to work out how you can lose the obvious. If people asked you to write about this mouse, for example, a lot of people might say, oh, okay, it's a mouse, it's got 2 clickable parts, a scrolling part, it's got a battery compartment that opens up at the back, it's made by Logitech, and yeah, you know, that's how they'll potentially talk about a mouse. Yeah, they might mention the color, it's got a gray lining on it or something like that. But if you want to be creative about the mouse, maybe you put yourself into its persona. Maybe you pretend you're the mouse. Maybe you talk about, I don't get woken up just once a day. I get woken up 15, 20 times a day at somebody else's will. I have to run about the place, and then suddenly I'm asked just to stop. People don't seem to think about the idea that I might be out of breath and I might want to take my breath when I want to, not when they want me to. People clicking on me all the time, constantly hitting the left, hitting the right. What do they think I am? Some kind of punch bag? I'm not a punch bag, I'm a mouse. You know, you make something like that changes the idea, the scope of what you're writing about. And then that's where the creativity sometimes comes from. I don't know how I just made up what I just made up. It was just, it's nonsense. But it's just fun, I think, sometimes to have parameters, to have boundaries, and it can make you more creative rather than less.
Yes, that's true. And that's a great example, by the way. A great story about the mouse.
I'll have to watch it back and see if it was actually any good.
So, Stefano, to bring this to an end, to bring our discussion to an end, you see your story now, and you see the story you were telling about yourself, I don't know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or maybe even last year when the great big pandemic hit. What is one takeaway from this, and what advice, you already kind of touched on this, what advice would you give to people that are maybe struggling right now to be more true to who they are, to maybe take that first step on the storytelling journey, to maybe have a bit of extra motivation on their daily work, along their daily routines? What can you tell them?
I think one of the key parts that I would suggest, I can't give advice in general on life. That's not my area of expertise. But what I can say is that from being creative and from the idea of writing the story and trying to allow people to understand what makes you unique and what makes you different, is what makes you unique and what makes you different is you. Don't try to be different. Don't try to stand out. We talk about at Puck Creations, we talk a lot about, as a brand, the kind of core pillars or ideas behind a brand are that you are clear, consistent, relevant, and that you stand out, that you differentiate yourself. But we're always very careful to also say that differentiating yourself and standing out doesn't mean trying to be different. Differentiating yourself means understanding who you are and allowing the bits that you think resonate and are relevant for you and your business to your audience to do the work for you. That will automatically make you different. So the first thing I would suggest that anyone does who is trying to define their brand is to stop and to reflect. That would be the number one starting point I would give to every single person and business. That's what we do with our clients. We get them to stop and we get them to reflect. And when we're defining their brand, we're not creating something new for them. All we're doing is getting them to take a moment to actually understand who they really are.
Yes, and I think that um, as deeper as you're willing to go with exploring yourself and exploring the way in which you can help others by, your services, your products, is the same way in which you can be able to know your audience and what they need so you can deliver it to them.
Very much so.
Thank you very much, Stefano, for making magic with words in our conversation. I'm happy you were willing to come on this talk and share a bit of your personal story with me and our listeners. And I will leave you with one final note. Get to where you want to be, one story at a time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Yulia. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the emails so you can be notified when the next videos are uploaded. You can find all the necessary details in the description below.